Hi, and welcome to Chapter 14, the lymphatic system. So, the lymphatic system is kind of one of those systems that a lot of people don't know about. If you were to go onto the street and ask somebody, what is the function of the lymphatic system? I bet you there's very few people who could tell you what the answer to that question, right? So, let's take a peek, but it's very important. It's similar to the cardiovascular system in that it's a transport system, but there are, unique differences between them. So let's go ahead and take a look at the function first. What is it? What does it do? All right. So one of its main functions is to maintain fluid balance. In other words, it takes lost fluids from the cardiovascular system and puts it back into the cardiovascular system. Because as we looked at blood vessels, capillaries tend to be kind of leaky. So, substances not only that are needed and needed to be transported around, like oxygen and nutrients, but that exchange that occurs there, in that process, we lose fluids, and the fluids are lost into the tissues, right? So if you think about it, when you have swelling, all right, swelling in your ankles in certain places, one reason could be the lymphatic system, okay? That perhaps it's not taking that fluid that is collecting in the tissues and taking it back to the cardiovascular system. So we'll take a look at that. All right, so it maintains fluid balance. Another thing, and here I have about 3 liters of fluid is lost daily from the blood and into the tissues and then make their way back into the lymphatic vessels. Another thing is lipid absorption. So lipids are a little, they have to have their specialized vessels to carry lipids from the digestive system to the cardiovascular system. All right, because it's a nutrient also. Okay, so as we digest food, we digest our lipids, and I guess apparently it can't just regular um blood vessels aren't I don't know that it can't transport the lipids from the digestive system back to itself, so it needs specific um vessels that do this. And so these are called lacteals. So that's what I'm trying to stress. Specialized vessels called lacteals that are lymphatic vessels that take the fat, okay, the lipid from the digestive system, and it transports it to the blood. All right, defense. So the lymphatic system is important in defending our body. There's specialized lymphatic organs located around our body, such as lymph nodes, spleen, and lots of other lymphatic organs that will house the specialized white blood cells. Okay, so the leukocytes can be housed there outside of the blood, okay, outside of the blood vessels, and make their way out of the cardiovascular system and reside in these places, like tonsils also. And they found that, like the appendix, might have some lymphatic function. But anyway, so we need these organs around our body, lymphatic organs, to house these cells that will protect our body, these leukocytes. All right. Oh, I do have a little image here, which is kind of an overview which is kind of nice. So I'll call this, I'll call this our overview. Okay. So here we can see, here's the cardiovascular system. And as I've mentioned before, it's all continuous, right? Blood doesn't leave, you know, pool within a chamber or something outside of the cardiovascular system. It goes from the heart, arterial circulation, okay, oxygenated blood leaves the heart, goes to all, throughout the body, and then comes through capillaries where there's a lot of exchange of materials, and then comes back deoxygenated back to the heart to then be transported to the lungs for oxygenation. All right, so this is the cardiovascular system around the outside. Now, as blood makes its way under high pressure, okay, through the arteries, fluid is lost. Okay, fluid is lost, and then it's picked up by lymphatic vessels, and then makes their way to larger lymphatic vessels, and then we'll dump it back into the veins, kind of in the neck here, kind of by the internal jugular vein there. All right, and so this is kind of its main function is to bring fluids lost from the arterial system and then make its way back to the venous system. All right. Also takes fats from our digestive system through lacteals and then transports it into the lymphatic vessels, which then take it back to the cardiovascular system. One thing, did I say? Oh, okay. I said defense, but the spleen actually filters the blood, and there are lymphatic cells, right? The leukocytes found in the spleen also, but it does, and it does other things. The spleen, it kind of gets rid of the old red blood cells. So there's a lot of blood that's stored in the spleen. So, if you injure your spleen, you could, it will bleed a lot. So sometimes you have to take it out if there's injury. But one of the things, the blood comes in here, it's filtered through here. We have lymphatic cells in there, and then the blood makes its way over to the venous system. Also bone marrow here. This is a site of lymphocytes. Okay, not well, B and T cells, yeah, lymphocytes, specialized cells that are leukocytes, right? And we'll talk about them a little bit. And then the cells, lymphocytes, mainly lymphocytes that are our defense system, which then will make its way into the blood and then be transported all over for fighting, defending our body. We have some lymphocytes, specialized lymphocytes called T cells that have to go to the thymus for maturation. So they go there to mature, to become active T cells to be able to fight disease. All right, we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the B and T cells, okay, so the lymphocytes, the leukocytes, right? Leukocytes are the white blood cells, but specifically lymphocytes. And there's different types of lymphocytes, B and T cells. They go to all lymphatic tissue. They go around the whole body, right? And then they do what they need to do. So, if you get a cut in your hand, there's bacteria that are coming in. Well, the B and T cells are transported by the blood, by the cardiovascular system. And then they'll make their way out of the cardiovascular system into the tissues along with fluid, right? So that's why there's swelling there also. We'll talk hopefully a little bit about inflammation, and then fight. They fight there in the tissues for you to get rid of the bacteria and other things coming in. All right, and then they make their way back to the cardiovascular system. All right, that is the lymphatic system. So let's take a look at some lymphatic organs. So I've mentioned a couple of them in our little description above, but let's talk about some specific lymphatic organs. Okay, I'm going to bring up a list here and then we'll locate them on a diagram. All right. So let's start with the tonsils. I mentioned the tonsils. The tonsils, previously thought to just get in the way and be a nuisance. right? So they used to remove tonsils all the time until they found out that they're actually lymphatic organs. They house lymphocytes, which are white blood cells. So they're housed there, they hang out there, and it makes sense because we have tonsils in our throat, right? In the back of our nasal passageways. We have three different types of tonsils, and one behind the tongue, one on either side of our throat, and one in the back of our nasal cavity. So they have different names. But anyway, so we have this lymphatic tissue that houses these lymphatic um, lymphocytes, and they fight disease through openings to the outside, right? So that's why they're there, is because that's an entryway for pathogens, right? So it makes sense. And so they don't remove them unless there are problems, such as they call the ones in the back pharyngeal tonsils are in the back of the nasal cavity, but when they get enlarged, they're called adenoids. And sometimes people, can't sleep or have trouble, get their airways blocked, right? Or well, their nasal passageways blocked, snoring, things like that. Sometimes the adenoids get removed. The uh, the other tonsils. Okay, there's lingual tonsils and gosh, pharyngeal, lingual, and okay, it will come to me in a second. But anyway, there's other tonsils on the sides, you know what I mean? On each side. And those could get very big. But in order to get those removed, you have to have certain criteria before they get them removed. My son has really big ones, and I said, just go check with the ear, nose, throat doctor and see whether they need to be removed because they kind of get in the way of swallowing and stuff like that. But then they said no because he doesn't have chronic strep throat and things like that. He has had them, but it's not a chronic thing. So, all right. Other ones are lymph nodes. Lymph nodes are located around the body, but they are concentrated in certain areas. Now let's think about it. Where might it be located? All right, so the lymph nodes, so think about it. Where are they located? We have a lot in the neck. We have them in our axillary region, our armpit region, in our groin, right? And when we're sick, okay, those get enlarged, right? Sometimes you could feel them here in your neck, in your armpit, maybe they get enlarged. Notice they're near openings to the outside, okay, around the mouth and nasal cavity, right? Mammary, okay, in your nipples, you have openings there. And then in your groin, right, there's urinary, reproductive, digestive openings there. So anywhere where there's a place where things can get in, we have a concentration of lymph nodes, which are lymphatic organs, which contain lymphocytes, these white blood cells that hang out there and wait for things to enter. All right, so I hope it makes sense. You want it to make sense because then you don't have to memorize. All right. The thymus gland. The thymus gland is located kind of uh, like in your chest area. Okay, it kind of sits in front of the heart. When we're young, it's actually quite large, but as we get older, it shrinks. And okay, the third tonsil is palatine tonsils. Okay, so there's the pharyngeal tonsils or the adenoids, the lingual tonsils, which are near the tongue, and then, yeah, okay. So those are the third tonsils, the palatine tonsils, the ones on the side. Okay, let's go back. Thymus gland. So it's this gland that where lymphocytes, certain lymphocytes go, they mature there, and then from their mature T cells, we call them lymphocytes, go on into the cardiovascular system and do their thing. The spleen. Okay, as I mentioned, it removes old red blood cells, but it also filters the blood and contains lymphocytes. So let me bring up this picture. There we go. Let's make it bigger. Okay. So we have lymph nodes here in the neck. We have lymph nodes in the axillary region and the groin region. And then, we have them scattered around. We do have them here in the abdomen. But anyway, they're like little guard towers, okay, that sit there and wait for pathogens to come in. All right, and I hope that makes sense. And so, in the neck region, lymph nodes there, if they enlarge, okay, maybe if you're ill or something like that, can be an indication. But if you have enlarged lymph nodes in other areas, you know, it's it pay attention. Pay attention. Do they not go away, right? Because even like cancerous cells can go into the lymph nodes and collect there and cause enlargement. So pay attention to those. All right, let's talk about how does the lymphatic system and the lymphatic cells, okay, the white blood cells mainly, protect our body. How does it work? Okay, so there's different types of what we call immunity. One is called innate and one is called adaptive. Innate kind of refers to general responses that are not very specific to a particular pathogen. So, for example, things that are very general, okay? And we have defenses in our body, actually different lines of defense. So if you think of like an army, there's going to be the front line. They encounter the pathogen first, okay? And maybe it's very it's not specific. So whoever runs up and attacks them, they're going to, fight them. So it's not very specific. Um, Once they pass the first line, then there's a second line of defense. Okay. And again, it could be very general. So maybe some of these general people, okay, get past the first line into the second line, then they're going to take care of it. Okay. And then maybe there's specialized people who are very specific, and the defense for those particular invaders, right, would have to be very specific to be able to, you know, sorry if I'm using war terms and you don't like that, but they use first line and second line of defense. So think about it as invasion of your body now. Okay. And so sometimes there's things that get in that are very specific, and we have to have very specific ways to deal with it. And it is able to adapt to that one particular pathogen. All right. So that's the difference between innate and adaptive. Innate is very general. Okay. And whereas adaptive is very specific. So let's take a look at the first, the innate type. And just to think about it, think of how does our body protect itself? How does it protect itself? So the first thing, we'll talk about the first line of defense. Okay, your skin. Okay, intact skin. If it's there's a cut or it's broken through, that's not a good line of defense. But the best is an intact skin, right? Next is mucous membranes. And this is all to keep things just from entering our body, right? So intact skin, number one. Number two, mucous membranes. So all our openings to the outside, through our nose, through our mouth, through the digestive, urinary, reproductive, respiratory, these are all places where pathogens can get in. So all those passageways are lined by mucous membrane. And we've talked about mucous membranes, secretes mucus, right? It's sticky. They're going to trap whatever comes in. And like I said, it's very general. Okay, not specific. So anything that enters there, it's going to get stuck in there, whether it be a bacteria or dust or, smoke or whatever it is. It's going to get stuck, particles, right, from smoke, right? It's going to get caught. That's the mucous membrane. Other secretions, urine, tears, saliva, okay? Those flush out systems. Okay, so think of, like a tunnel and army people are coming in or the enemy's coming in and you just push water through there. Okay, it's going to flush them out and it's not specific, right? Whoever's in there is going to get knocked out. All right, so that's urine, tears, saliva. Second line of defense. So what if you get past the first line? All right. The first line of defense is going to get rid of most things, but there's things that are still going to get in, right? They're going to enter your digestive system and maybe get past those initial mucous membranes or your respiratory system, right? Um, what do we have in place? Lots of things. Something called the complement system. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this. It's a complex system of lots of different proteins that when it encounters a pathogen, it can organize itself in a very systematic way and form a structure, something that can actually destroy the pathogen. So know that we have a system of proteins that can come together to actually get rid of whatever it is that came in. A fever. This is kind of interesting. Fever, you don't really think about it. You think about, oh, if I have a fever, I'm sick, right? I've got the flu. But it actually is a line of defense. It's a defense mechanism. How does it work? So when we get sick, we have a pathogen in our body. Um, what happens is it alters our set point, our thermostat in our brain. And so our body temperature will rise to meet the new set point. So let's say sometimes toxins and things that are secreted by pathogens, like a bacteria will secrete a toxin that causes a change in our set point. So where we might be 96, 98.6, the new set point might be 102. All right. And so our brain is altered in that way. But now our body is at 98, right? And it says, hey, the new set point's 102. So what do? What's the first thing we notice when we're sick? We start shivering. We feel cold all the time, right? You start shivering. Well, it's a mechanism to increase heat in our body, to increase our body temperature to meet the new set point. All right. And a fever can actually cause number one, it could actually get rid of the pathogen if it's high enough, but we don't really want our temperature to get too high, right? Because other bad things happen. But it can get rid of the pathogen and it can also promote healing. All right. It can promote more white blood cells, lymphocytes coming to the area to fight the disease or just warmth makes processes go faster, speed up healing. Phagocytosis, there are just some white blood cells, leukocytes that are just eaters, right? They eat things. Neutrophils are good at that. Monocytes that mature into something called macrophages, they can eat bacteria and whatever, get rid of things that way. All right. And then there's something called natural killer cells. Natural killer cells are specialized lymphocytes, leukocytes that can destroy cells infected with virus and cancer. Okay, so there are some cells that yeah, kind of tend to attack certain things, but we still put them in the innate immunity. All right, but it can recognize weird cells that are infected or cancerous cells, which is difficult to do because those are actually your own cells, right? Cancer cells are your own cells that have lost control over cell division, and it just makes too many of them. Whereas viruses infect your own cells and hide in there and kind of take over that cell. All right. So it's a little, these, I have to be a little specialized to be able to do that. Inflammation. Okay, the inflammatory response. So let me talk a little bit about the inflammatory response. I think I have a kind of flow chart here. So inflammation. Okay, so think about inflammation. All right, what happens in inflammation? So before we go through this, let's think about it. Okay, so inflammation's happening. You get a cut on your skin, right? And what happens? It gets red, right? It gets weepy, you get pus and stuff coming out of it. It can get swollen too, right? And warm, right? So you get a cut, oh, it's infected. That's what you say. Well, that's the inflammatory response happening. And it's actually a natural process. So, oh, here they put a splinter. Okay, you get a splinter in your finger and bacteria come in, right? Now you don't have an intact skin. So now bacteria is coming in. Um, from the site, you have chemicals that are released by cells there, kind of like SOS. Help, all right? Some of these chemicals act as a chemotaxis substance, which um, does certain things. So it's a chemical that causes these things to happen. The blood vessels become permeable, meaning they become leaky. Why is this important? Well, one thing we can see it in it gets weepy, like I said, right? It starts oozing stuff, right? But it increases white blood cells that can leave the blood vessels and enter the tissue to help fight. All right. So what do we see? Um, not only does it get weepy or more permeable, but it also causes dilation of blood vessels to that area. So these chemicals cause all these things to happen. Okay, blood vessel dilation. Oh, that's why it gets red because more blood is going to the area and it gets leaky. All right, increased number of white blood cells, chemical mediators, site of tissue damage, right? So it's all bringing these things to that area. Bacteria contained, destroyed, phagocytized. Okay, so the white blood cells will neutralize them and then eat them. Bacteria gone, the tissue begins repairing, right? Because now, there's more oxygen in that area. Also, there's more healing, nutrients that are brought to the area because of the dilation and the leakiness, right? But if the bacteria remain, okay, maybe there's a lot of bacteria that came, you're going to get more mediators and it's going to go back up here and, keep this going. All right. So I think sometimes inflammation, we want to try to prevent inflammation when in fact it's a natural process. But there is a point at which we get too much inflammation, right? So there's people with chronic inflammation going on in, their digestive system or their nervous system, where there's chronic inflammatory response. And in some of these autoimmune diseases where your own body attacks itself. And so you have chronic inflammation, and that actually causes damage over time, right? So we have to, kind of balance the inflammation. But in short term, acute situations, which is short term, then it is actually beneficial. All right. Now, let's take a look at let's see. So those were the first line. Let's talk about the adaptive. Okay, sorry. Let's do adaptive. Okay, we're still on this one question. It's a big question, actually. Okay, oops, it's not. Okay, so the second type is adaptive defenses. Strange, let me look. A is innate. This will be B. Sorry. All right. So there's two types, or some things about adaptive defenses. It's very specific, right? Not general. We call this the immune response, okay, or really precisely immunity. So when you hear the word immunity, we're really talking about adaptive defenses or these very specific defenses, even though I used immunity up here. Innate immunity, that's how your textbook refers to it. But usually immunity is referred to adaptive type, which is very specific. Let me define antigen. An antigen is a surface marker that can cause an immune response. Okay, so usually talking about something foreign that enters your body, and there are markers on the surface that you see as foreign, so we'll call that an antigen, right? So immunity is precise resistance to specific antigens. All right, now what we're going to do in this question is talk about the different types of immune responses, okay? This specific adaptive defenses. And there's two types of defenses, okay? So the first one is called antibody mediated. Another name for that is called humoral immunity. So, oh, that's the one I'm doing here. And then the other type is the last question, cell mediated. So antibody mediated, that's the first type of defense. That's very specific. Oops. Let me get that again. Yeah. Okay, hold on while I grab it. I'm having trouble grabbing it. All right. Oops. Oh, dang. Okay, hold on a second. I gotta find it. Okay, sorry about that. I actually deleted it. All right, here we go. So the first type is called humoral. And in different textbooks, you'll see that. It's the same thing as antibody-mediated immunity. So this is an indirect response. And maybe let's go to our drawing. We haven't really drawn anything yet. Okay, so humoral immunity or immune response. Remember that it is very specific. So we're in adaptive, right? So when I say it's an indirect response, it's that cells are not going to actually attack another cell like a bacteria and get rid of it. It does it indirectly. So the first type of cell that's involved here are called B cells. These are lymphocytes. All right. So B cells, they first identify the pathogen. Okay, so they identify the antigen. So here, let's say, is our bacteria, and it's got little antigens on its surface, and it has to identify it because remember, it's very specific. So it's this particular type of bacteria that it says, hey, that's the antigen, that's bad, and I'm going to do several things. The first thing is I'm going to make a whole bunch of B cells that have a match to that particular antigen. Like this is the B cell that's going to be able to attack that particular bacteria. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to, with the help of a helper, B cell, helper cell. All right. It's going to help me make an army. Now I'm going to make an army of that particular type of B cell, right? Because I first have to identify it before I make an army. Okay. Now, once I make an army, these guys then become what's called plasma cells. So plasma cells are mature B cells that are capable and specific to that particular bacterial antigen. See how it's going to match it? And what they begin doing is they begin producing antibodies. But the antibodies, again, are very specific to that particular antigen, right? They're not going to make an antibody that looks like that, okay? Because they already identified the ones they need. So they make millions of antibodies. I can't remember the rate, but it's a lot. And then the antibodies are going to come back and bind to the antigens. And the antibodies now act as little flags. They're little flags that are going to mark it for disposal by, let's say, the phagocytes, the macrophage, which is a giant monocyte that's going to come and eat it. But it needs to be recognized first as foreign by the little tags, the antibodies. All right. So the humoral immune response is very indirect, right? The B cell doesn't attack it. It makes antibodies that flag it for destruction by the phagocytes, the macrophage. All right. Does that make sense? But it's very effective. So what happens then after that? This goes on. Some of these cells will become memory cells. In other words, we have B cells that are specific for that particular antigen that circulate for, for a long time. Okay, now, depending on what it is, it can be days, it could be weeks, it could be months, it could be years, depending on what it is. It could be your whole life. So this is the idea between about like immunizations. Okay, think about it. You get a shot and you're protected from, measles, okay, or rubella, or smallpox, or okay, COVID. All right. So it might not be bacteria, it could be a virus. How does that work? And how does it give you immunity? And why is like, for like, some diseases, you don't ever have to get immunized again. Whereas some, like COVID, you have to get immunized again and again. What's the difference? All right. In all cases, we create memory. We have memory floating around in our bodies. Now, some of the memory is very good. In other words, once we encounter that smallpox, okay, or that particular bacteria again, then the memory cells are already primed and ready, and they will just boom, make antibodies and destroy it before we even know we have it, okay? Before it causes any kind of symptoms or disease, all right? That's how immunity works because we have our memory there. But there are some things like COVID, okay, that virus, we don't have good memory. And so we have to get, because a new antigen comes out. So let's say this is a virus that the antigen changes a little over time. And so now we have to have another another booster. Okay. And sometimes our memory just fades. So sometimes we need boosters of certain diseases, certain pathogens that because our memory fades, right? Um, so anyway, but there are some that last their whole life, right? It's kind of amazing how that works, right? Now, do you immunize or do you not immunize? I know there's some people who choose not to immunize, and everybody has their reasons, but for the most part, for the population, immunization works, right? You're going to have certain people who react poorly to it or whatever, but for the good that it does, um, immunization is um, is good. All right, it can eradicate diseases, and yeah, and certainly it's a chance we take, right? But for the way amount of good that it can do, we promote it. Okay, I promote it. All right. But, again, to understand before you make these decisions, you have to understand what's happening. What is it? So how does an immunization work? We know, what the outcome is, but what is it that's you're being injected with? Okay. It's the antigen. Um, so you might want to look at, well, what are they actually injecting you with? Because it varies. They're not all the same. Because sometimes it's a part of the antigen, all right, that can cause the reaction, but it won't cause the disease. Sometimes they give you the whole organism with the antigens intact, but they make the organism ineffective, right? They do something to the organism to make it so it can't cause disease, but it has all the antigens on it. So you might want to look at exactly what it is that you're being injected. There are some live vaccines, so that may give you more of the actual pathogen. So anyway, that's something to look at. I know with certain diseases that they can't do. So it depends on what part of the a pathogen they use that's important. So do your homework, right? Okay, so let's go back to our okay, and take a look at this now. Indirect, yes, uses antibodies. Identifies, makes an army, produces antibodies that mark the antigen for destruction, like little flags. And then some become memory. All right. The second type of, not the second type, but let me give you a picture that might help before we get to the last type of. All right. And, of course, I'm not going to ask you to know the detail of like a diagram like this, but it kind of shows you helper T cell. Oh, I said helper B cell. Sorry, helper T cell. Let's go back to that because I don't like that. Let's change it. Okay, because we're on B cells and we'll talk about T cells next. So T cells, helper T cells, which are also lymphocytes. They're both lymphocytes. All right. So the helper T cells, picture diagram. Okay, now I can go on. This allows for making multiple armies, right? Then they're going to make antibodies here. Okay, I have a couple more diagrams. Here's a picture of the how antibodies work. Okay, so see how it marks the antigen, but then it causes them to kind of clump up together, all right, like that. They bind the antigens together. Okay, I think I have a couple more pictures. Let's see. Oh. Okay. Um, oh, this is activating complement, which causes the destruction um of the organism. Okay, chemotaxis too brings um creates chemicals that draw other things to it. Initiate the release of inflammatory chemicals. All right, so there's other things that happen, right? Because if you get any kind of infection, right, you get a bacterial infection, it's going to cause inflammation as a secondary kind of thing. Phagocytosis here, the macrophage is going to come and eat the antibody. This is kind of what I wanted you to see, the antibody attached to the antigen, and then it's going to be consumed. All right, let's see what else I have. Oh. These are all just from the textbook. All right. Um, so how does immunizations work so well, right? It doesn't mean you'll never encounter that bacteria again, right? If you get a cut and that bacteria, same bacteria is going to come in, but now you don't get sick or get problems with that because of this. So the primary response, the first time you encounter it, the response is very slow. Okay, it takes a while. You're exposed to it. It takes a while, right, to build the army, to make the antibodies, to do all that, and then the response is pretty small. Okay, memory cells travel, and then second time you encounter it here, boom, you get a huge response and fast. That's why you never feel it. You never get sick. The bacteria comes in. Ooh, I recognize that. Boom, you get rid of it so fast. That's why, immunization is so powerful. It's just such a powerful thing and amazing. Amazing. All right, let's take a look at the second type of response, which is called cell mediated. So again, we did the antibody mediated, right? Which I hope makes sense. It's a mediated or mediated by antibodies, right? B cells that make antibodies. The second type is cell mediated, and this deals with a different type of lymphocyte, not the B cells, but these are called T cells. Oops. All right. So this is a very direct. So when I say direct, it means these cells are going to just attack the pathogen and get rid of it. But there is, a similarity in the B cells in that we have to make the army first, right? So we do need the helper T cells again that help with making that army. So specific T cells bind to the antigen, and then the body forms an army. Then maybe I'll say instead of body, that kind of stuff. Then the helper T cells help to form an army against the pathogen. So that's kind of similar. And now we have an army of T cells, but the T cells just directly attack and destroy the invader. But a part of that population then becomes memory, much like the antibody mediated, except now you have ones that can directly attack. So it's much more direct. Right, so here we have the same kind of process here with the helper T cells, right? Okay, so let's say here's the target cell, some pathogen, it's got an antigen, right? The T cell that we want finds it, it binds to it. The helper T cells help to create an army. There, we're building an army. And then it does its thing by, here we have the army here. It's going to kill on contact the target cell, the pathogen, and then it actually can poke a hole in it and cause it to explode. All right. And then, there's the inflammatory response that is going to help to bring more nutrients, more oxygen, more cells to the region. Okay, so we have inflammation going on as these other things are happening. And then we have here, memory cells are produced also. All right, I think that is it. I hope it was interesting. It really, to understand how the immune response works, right? As you encounter pathogens, think of all that you breathe in, you eat, right? That the potato salad that's been sitting on the counter forever, right? Full of bacteria, right? How is your body dealing with these things? Um, and it's quite amazing. Our body is amazing. All right. Thanks for listening, guys. And I'll see you next time.